Hey David, hey Tim.
Hey T.
Hey, hello, hello.
Hey Tim, how you doing?
Awesome. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing good. How's the DEI space doing? Are you busy?
Oh man, busy, 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 but we have some challenges in front of us.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see what the corporate world wants to do about this thing.
That sounds both intriguing and terrifying at the same time.
And ominous.
Right,
Yes.
doesn't it though? Right.
Yes.
So do give us a little more story.
Well, I mean, with what we've got going on, for instance, down in Florida with the governor, and here in Georgia, the governor's done some similar things, and just a lot of pushback on DE&I, and certainly with what the Supreme Court has done now with regards to affirmative action in universities. Um, it's just it's raising some challenges around the work and whether it's viable and whether it's something that people believe is a part of business.
Hmm. And what are
Well, I
you
think
finding?
there are studies that show that DEI actually adds to the profitability of an organization. So, that's pretty strong evidence.
Yeah, but when you've got politicians kicking up sand and putting in laws that work against it, and then that bleeds. The big question is, will that bleed over into the corporate world in terms of
Well,
what you just mentioned?
I've always thought of these sorts of things. These are dynamic things that swing like a pendulum. And so while things might have be swinging right now to a certain extreme, one of the things that a swing to an extreme does is it draws attention. And that attention in turn influences how soon, how fast, and how far it will begin its movement in the opposite direction.
Yes.
If that makes sense, so there's going to be discomfort at both ends of the swing. If you think about a swinging pendulum, that when it gets to whatever they call that, at zenith, or I don't know what its word is, but it lingers, for some microsecond before it starts going the other direction. And so I would hope that our swing back the other way is going to begin sooner rather than later.
Right.
But I know that if it was just this flat, middle of the road kind of a thing, and there were issues that uh, weren't ready to be flat in the middle of the road, they may never get the attention they need.
Well, the thing, my professional opinion on this is that uh, the HR part of the organizations have long been dealing with fairness and equity in the workplace, long before the terms DE and I came about. And so I think the work will continue. We may just go back to talking about it in a different way, but you know, looking at talent acquisition, looking at L&D, looking at employer relations and the retention of your workforce, those are things that HR practitioners and leaders have been contributing to organizations for the longest. And so that's why we have employment laws, and that's why we have HR policies and procedures to try and create and craft in these organizations this whole issue of fairness and equity.
Mm-hmm. And what are you discovering at this point? More receptivity, more resistance?
Actually, I say more acceptance, but it's just the ones that I just mentioned in terms of politicians and that movement. I don't think that represents the majority of the viewpoint, but it has the microphone.
Yeah, it does. It does. Um, I'm trying to think how the person in one of my training classes actually said this, but so we were talking about this whole idea that if no one notices anything, nothing's going to change. Only when something gets really uncomfortable will people start doing something to mitigate the discomfort, that sort of thing. And she said something like, the day that stupidity becomes silent, we're in real trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
so,
that's why, a couple of sessions back, I had the conversation with you about the DEI with regards to the model in terms of productive tension and what we do with the change grid,
right.
see how it overlays. And so that's why I was very appreciative that we did those two sessions on looking at how that DE&I work overlays on the change grid, because it is productive tension within these organizations. And even then, if you go outside, which is a whole separate conversation around social justice, but I think it's the work we do and the conversations we have are applicable, undoubtedly within that area.
and so when you are presenting your services to a prospective client, are you talking about, or do you position DEI training, coaching, consulting as something that's going to impact their bottom line directly? Is it more about a cultural thing, or is it responding to some sort of legal requirements? What's driving people hiring DEI?
It's the gumbo. It's all of the things that you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the strategy of which to deploy is connected to the reason in which you've been brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you are brought in, as I may have mentioned on a prior call, because something has happened. And a lot of sessions that you kick off, within the first 10 minutes, you can almost expect that someone's going to raise their hand and say, why are we here? Did
Mm-hmm.
something happen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus people understanding and even considering that, well, we're here because it's a part of the strategy of this business.
Yeah. And
Not that we're responding to something.
well, okay, see, that's very interesting. I've always been curious to know what drives the success of a topic in the marketplace. And we'll get to the real call in just a couple of seconds. For those who just joined in, welcome. We're talking a little bit about some DEI issues and opportunities. And so I've always felt like until you can show that a topic is somehow or another going to impact the company's bottom line, they are going to be very cautious, thoughtful, resistant, who knows how to express itself, unless something has been mandated, in which case they'll do it, but they're doing it with in protest, if you will, or while protesting it. But I know there are some corporations out there that are far more savvy, far more, dare I say, woke, whatever that word even means. But that would embrace it because it resonates with their culture. It resonates with where they see the world going, where they want the world to go. But I would just wonder how big the market is right now for DEI training, and how you might be able to show that it does in fact increase bottom line performance. It boosts revenues. So,
A lot of it has to do with how the leader positions the reason as to why we're there.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So, yeah. And so when leaders do that effectively, then people come in and the table is set.
Right.
And once they get in there, I mean, if it's good content,
it'll sell itself after. Give you 15 minutes and it'll sell itself. But
yeah. And you look at the program evaluations afterwards, and
absolutely. Yeah, I just worry that there's a lot of companies out there who are bringing a DE&I training into the fold, so they can say to the public, we've gone through DEI training. This is something but are they really embraced it? Are they really, do the executives show up for your training?
Oh, absolutely. And in
That's
fact,
all the difference. That's great.
and sometimes they're mixed in, most times they're not. But when you get to the employee sessions, the questions do come up. Hey, has leadership been through this? They're telling us we have to come, but have they sat through it, right?
Yeah.
And so the reward is when people come up to you afterwards and say to you, listen, when I got the email saying I had to come to this, I did not want to come, but I am glad I did. And I learned a lot, you know. And so
that's super valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, again, and everyone else chime in on this, particularly those who've been trying to market training programs that are not, you know, sales and leadership and basic management skills and time management and all those kind of topics that have been around for generations. You know, if you're out there, hang on just 1 second. I'm on the call.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So that was Linda. So hard to keep track of something that happens twice a week, every week for 4 years.
Tim, you know, for DE&I, you know, one of the major factors with ChangeWorks is this idea of relationship tension.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, you could focus on relationship tension and the issues it creates in velocity and profitability and teamwork and productivity, all those things.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I think, you know, when I think about the DE&I space, I do think, well, if you ever want the floodgates to open as far as opportunity is concerned, you just got to figure out the case for how it affects bottom line financial performance.
Yep.
And I believe there's lots of ways it does that. It may not be direct, but indirectly, as David was pointing out, you got a lot better cooperation. So people can focus on the tasks that need to be done instead of whatever interpersonal ick is going on. And when you really are able to see people in their purest form, you're then able to position those people, advance those people in your organization to optimize whatever their talents and abilities are, because you've eliminated all that stuff that prejudices decisions and, you know, suffers from biases and things like that. So Tim, when you're at these big D&I events with other practitioners in the space, do you guys talk about how you go about monetizing the training from the perspective of the client?
Yeah, that probably happens more with folks that are closer in your network as opposed to something more structured as a discussion. Yeah, so that's just that way. But I'll tell you that the more tense moments of the conversation is when the conversation goes to talking about race and sexual orientation.
Yeah.
You know, we approach it from a broader definition of difference in the workplace, and very comfortably talk about those other differences, whether you're talking about, you know, personality differences or generational differences, you know, but and they're real comfortable, and that's a lively discussion. But when it moves in that direction of talking about racial differences and sexual orientation, get very uncomfortable and the room gets very tense.
Yeah, because think about even the individuals that are just showing up. What are the chances that throughout their lifetime, you know, as they were growing up, they were told that you don't discuss such things in public. We don't talk about people's sex lives. We don't, you know, we just don't do that as a society or as a culture. You would pretty much consider that to be an inappropriate discussion to have publicly. At least that's the way that I was raised. I mean, I was raised to kind of see the person, not their skin, because I was born and raised in inner city Detroit. So I had every kind of opportunity up and down every side of every block to cultivate all kinds of relationships. And so I always thought that really gave me an advantage as opposed to people who were growing up in I don't want to say deliberately segregated communities, but bottom line, just practically segregated communities and never learned.
Well, what we discover, though, in having those conversations is that there are a lot of things going on within organizations beyond just racial differences and sexual orientation. You know, for instance, you start talking about the worker experience between those who work in the corporate office and those who work in the field. There's some really different thoughts and experiences going on there. And when you give people an opportunity to talk about those experiences, then you make some discoveries. When you talk about differences in certain lines of business, well, how are the folks over in the sales organization being treated versus those in operations versus those in customer service?
Oh, yeah.
Budget allocation, you know. And so all of that is a part of that broad discussion around diversity in the workplace. But there is this general notion that it's really only when I hear the word diversity, first thought and only thought may be they're talking about race.
Yep. And again, if that's what most business owners or business executives think, the moment they hear the term, then how does that impact their receptivity? They're not out shopping for it.
Right.
So, and if it comes their way, are they going to kind of dismiss it because they too have this mistaken frame that they've put around it? T, you've just unmuted. What would you like to throw in?
Oh, I have nothing to throw in. That I just remember attending some diversity things way back in the 70s and 80s, and just how it was emotional then for a lot of people, and how many of, I'll say of us because it's just easier, didn't see ourselves as being biased or whatever, and our actions didn't do it, but sometimes our heads did it, I've heard in conversation.
Oh, absolutely. T, I'll give you an example for me personally. I had to go over to Alabama actually to do some work over there. I live in Georgia, and I left Georgia later than I had intended. So, but by the time I got in proximity to where I was going in Alabama, it was around midnight. And I'm driving, it's dark, and I noticed a car behind me.
Yeah.
And as I kept looking in the rearview mirror, I then noticed that it was a police car. Now, you can imagine what video began to play in my head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, at that time, I didn't go to Alabama very often, certainly not for personal reasons. I didn't really have friends or colleagues in the state of Alabama. So I really did not have an Alabama experience. But I had some Alabama data from the 60s, with what was happening there. And all of a sudden, that videotape started playing in my head.
Yes.
And so now I'm wondering, because now I'm getting tense. I'm looking at my speedometer and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm being followed. And then the car turns off. And I wound up sharing that story in the session that next morning. And I raised this question that I posed to myself. Was that police car following me? Or is it possible we just happen to be going in the same direction for a short distance?
Yes.
But certainly the videotape is there. And it impacts and influences our thinking. And then sometimes ultimately our behavior in terms of how we treat one another.
No, you're absolutely right.
I thank you for sharing that, because sometimes I thought it was only me. That's why I said us. But because what's going on in my head, I'm going, why is that happening? I don't even believe that. And but there's something there, and I'm thinking the devil's doing it. So, I don't know. It's just very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Tim.
Absolutely.
Very much. I would like to throw into the discussion a principle that we covered, I don't know how long ago. I think we were talking about neurolinguistic programming. There is a line out of neurolinguistic programming that says that the meaning of any communication is the response it elicits regardless of the intention of the communicator.
I believe that.
Right. So ultimately, as we receive information, we are adding the meaning to that information. That meaning may or may not match the communicator's intention, but whatever it is they said and however they said it, that comes and we add the meaning to it. Well, not all communication is verbal. I believe that you had a police car behind you, and there was something inside of that that equals communication. Because, whether or not the voices are the voices of the police or the voices of history or the voices of family and friends and people who have experienced things, that communication happened. And as that communication was happening, you were the one that was adding that meaning to it based on the experiences you've had, the knowledge you have, et cetera. I mean, we'll never know what was really going on, but how many of you, even hearing the story, feel as though or believe as though the police were following him?
And this, I remember somebody saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it's not true.
Right.
And I always think about that. And I'm going, okay, what is what's the question in my head? How can I reverse that question? And you had asked about the monetary thing for relationships, and I have a model that actually 3 of us started back in the 90s or 80s, and I've enlarged it with some experiences, and I call it the productivity model. And it shows that process is actually a huge thing, but it's really about interpersonal, as you know, process. And so I would like actually to take it to a university to have them try and mathetize it. I don't know if that's right.
Mathetize, I love it.
To do that, because I don't think there's really anything out there besides organization to organization or individual department who does something like that. And they've never really quantified it or qualified it. So I think there's a large body of work that can be done. When I worked with Baldrige, you always look at the 7 systems, and you know that the human part is extremely important to results. And but you don't know what that quantification is, so and they call it a soft stuff, but it's really the hardest stuff to really quantify.
True. Yeah, soft skills are far more difficult than hard.
Oh my gosh, yes. So if anybody has any ideas how I might do that, I will gladly take your idea and let you work with me. Aren't you the lucky ones?
Well, first of all, I would be very curious to have you share that model that you've developed with everybody on the circle. Obviously, I'm curious to see how it resonates with tension management and that sort of a thing. But we can market a little bit, see who else we can get on the call, and see if they've got some connections that might be worth you pursuing. So yeah, excellent.
That'd be great. I'll send that to you.
Yeah. So, all right, Kathy, you had unmuted there for a moment. So what were you going to share or contribute?
I honestly can't remember. It was to a comment that someone made earlier. I think you had asked the question, how many of you think that that Tim was actually being followed? And, I think that we operate, there is that intuitive side of us, sometimes we are just being paranoid or concerned, and I wouldn't say paranoid. I would say concerned based on real facts and experience, that says, gee, this has happened before, maybe I need to pay attention to this now. But there's also energy, and people feel energy, whether they want to say it. And Tim might have felt I know what that's like as a woman.
Right. Yeah.
To be followed, to be, you know, I mean, I've gone through all kinds of experiences from the 1960s on
Yeah.
that say, I don't think I was being paranoid at all. I think there was an energy that I didn't
Yep.
trust, that it was a darker energy that I didn't trust. So there's always that factor. Now, most people would say, well, that can't be proven. Don't be silly. You know, it's based on other things. But we are human beings, and we have a whole range of senses that we use in drawing our conclusions. So that's really all I wanted to say to
Well,
that.
I mean, that's a wonderful contribution, because where did we decide that we only have five senses? I mean, I don't, that's how we've all been taught, but maybe they're just saying, like, unless we can tell you, I've said this before, what organ of the body is collecting this information, then we're just making stuff up. How come my whole body can't be a sensor for the energies that are around me? How come I can't just be an energy detector, and my whole being is what that's all
Well,
about?
and I just have to comment on that, T. I mean, don't forget those went back to Aristotle, those five senses. So
Yeah.
they're pretty old. You know, there's been a lot of stuff happening. I've been reading this amazing book called An Immense World, and it was written last year, and it's all about animals and how they sense and where those senses come from, everything from elephants to mosquitoes. And it's just a mind-blowing set of data that this scientist, neuroscientist, and biologist has been doing. And I just can't remember his name because it's on my Kindle, and I always forget the name of authors of books on my Kindle. But if anybody wants to know how multidimensional and multifactorial you know, whether human senses, but certainly animal senses can be, where, you know, yeah, thank you, Ed Young. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And so if you're familiar with that, YONG, mind-blowing book. Takes a while to get through, but mind-blowing book. And, you know, so, you know, ears and eyes and noses can detect a whole range of senses other than what we normally assign to them. So
Right,
there's
right.
so much more we need to learn about that.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I've always thought, if a school of fish can all turn the exact same direction at the exact same moment, how come we don't have that capability? You know, how are the fish communicating? They're not, I mean, I
Well,
don't know.
we
They're psychic.
probably could if we developed our sensory perceptions enough to do that.
Right, there you are. So going back to the initial thing about Tim's response and to having that, I was thinking that what you actually are is you're not really feeling, you're just alerted. I think that's the thing to say. You've picked up something and you are now alerted to that, kind of like, I don't want to compare humans to dogs, but dogs have got a lot of abilities we don't have. So you know, like a dog will just suddenly alert to whatever's going on, and it's just saying there's a potential threat in the environment. Whatever you're picking up, however you're picking it up, you've picked something up and it's put you on alert. I would be very concerned if Tim were in such a situation as he's described it and not be alerted to it. You know, from a survival perspective, there's lots of reasons why he has legitimate concerns about what is happening behind him. So, Tim, do you agree with that, or?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it may have been in his book, Blink. Malcolm Gladwell used this term rapid cognition, and he talked about the repetition of messaging and how it affects how we think and how we behave. And again, when I talk about the videotape playing in my head, that was that rapid cognition. So all the data points that I had about the state of Alabama is what was playing on the reel. And then it becomes, and so to your point, you know, and Kathy's point, then that's what I used to assess the situation that I was in, be it right or wrong, but I was only going off of the data that I had.
When you're talking about becoming alerted, I think we're trying to get our survival instincts ready. in case a true threat were to, to come out of that situation. So I think what you're describing is a completely natural self-preservation, whatever instinctual sort of thing we want to add to it. I get that completely. I guess I'm wondering, is this, did the police officer, first of all, recognize that you were a Black man driving a car late at night, blah, 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 and think I might be making him uncomfortable being behind him? Obviously, he's doing nothing wrong. So let me turn off the road so that he doesn't have to be concerned about that. Wouldn't it be nice if we believed that was a possibility? You know, but you're kind of go like, yeah, I don't think so, man.
Hey T.
Yes, go ahead.
So as I'm listening, especially some work that I've been doing around inclusion and wanting everybody to be at the table, I was thinking about what if there were officers in this room right now, and from their perspective would be thinking, well, the police officer just did their normal checks that they would do any evening, right? If a car comes by them 12 a.m., they did their normal checks and then went on about their business like they would
got nothing else to do, so they ran the license plate.
Right. And like they would do for anybody else and moved on. So, and it's interesting the perspectives, right? So from the driver's or Tim's perspective, based on his past and I'll tread lightly here, like any assumed constraints that could be existing, real or imagined, right? They're going to receive that one way, but the officer is receiving it also a different way. And that's something else Malcolm Gladwell talks about is how when those two different perspectives collide, right? Where the intent could be pure, but because of those experiences and the way things are fed into, a whole different outcome could take place.
Very interesting. Yep.
Tim, I want to tell you that
David, we really can't hear you. It's all kind of electronically garbly.
Oh, okay.
Now you're better. Go ahead.
I was followed by a police car, attentive.
I missed that. I couldn't understand.
All we got was that you were being followed by a police car. So why don't you go ahead and type it over, and I'll share it with everybody, or we'll be able to read it and all that. Yeah. Okay, so, well, we've been talking about this now for half of our kind of session, so I'm not going to bother labeling the call now when we've got the time that's left here, but let's just kind of say, Tim, obviously there's a lot of this in this subject to explore, and I have no problem at all coming, setting aside some time for the circle to explore it more thoroughly. I know we've done that in some places as well, but or we've done it during some conversations before. But I'm more than happy to revisit it because I do believe that ultimately, well, I mean, I believe that everything in life is tension management. So we have to figure out how this whole situation of DEI becoming a necessary topic was driven by tension, how it's going about managing the level of tension of people who are going through the training and the awareness and all that, and what we kind of do to ultimately make the subject unnecessary. So I think there's a lot there to explore and unpack. David just chimed over. I'm always concerned about being followed by the police. Well, me too.
Yes. Well,
but I will tell you that as I'm concerned about the police being behind me for something, the only thing, and let me just double check what I'm about to say, the only thing I'm ever concerned with is getting a ticket.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about my physical safety. That's so yeah. Because our mental videotapes could very well be different. I've only had one traffic ticket and they ultimately dropped it because I was stuck between, I'll tell you guys very quickly, I was on the Ohio Turnpike. I pity anyone who's on the Ohio Turnpike, but I was. And I'm doing my thing. And I'm not someone who breaks the law. I mean, I really am very compliant by nature. But I'm driving alongside a U.S. Army convoy. And this convoy has got to be, I don't know, 50 vehicles or longer. I mean, it's a long, long convoy. And as I'm coming along a particular vehicle, the people in the convoy, the Army or whatever branch it was, I believe it was Army, are waving at me to not be next to their vehicle. And so I'm kind of like, there's 50 of you. I've got to be next to somebody. So I thought they're just waving me. So I thought, I got to get out of their way. I got to get out of their way. And so the next thing you know is I'm being pulled over because I'm going something like 75 and it's a 65. And I'm going like, yeah, but do I obey the laws of the state of Ohio, or do I obey what a bunch of Army soldiers are telling me to do in the moment? So I thought, I know I'm really afraid of offending the Army. They've all got weapons. You know what I mean? And so I felt more uncomfortable being next to the convoy than I felt being pulled over by the police. So talk about tapes being very different. Yeah, tapes can be very, very different. Yes.
And also exploring more than just interactions with law enforcement or authorities. Imagine to be followed in stores frequently,
Yes.
right? To be knowing that you're being watched, and this is like a daily occurrence, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
even though it's not a legal authority, but it's a different impact and it feels differently.
Right, because you're alerted to the thought that you're being viewed as a suspect or a potential suspect in something. You can't be trusted. You can't, there's all kinds of messages that we say the meaning of any communication is the response it elicits. So we're the ones that are adding the meaning. So whatever your meaning, do they think I'm a suspect? Do they think I'm blah, blah, whatever it is, there's a feeling of being judged and ending up being subjected to a set of behaviors that are unnecessary and, rude and whatever else you want to put there. So yeah, this is it's a real thing.
And all of those things, and as Chris just broadened that discussion, all of those things give us this perception of reality. And so in the work, we use something called the perception assumption model that says that, our perceived reality is fed from our environment, our educational process, be it formal or informal, our own interactions with others. All of that becomes data that we collect. And as we talk about that energy piece that Kathy was talking about earlier, which is why I think it's great that we've got the energy layers on the grid, we began to analyze our experience based off of that data. The difficulty is that thing happens so quickly. Most of the time, we don't validate the message that our brain is sending.
Mm-hmm.
So we act off of whatever the brain says to us is what's real.
Yep.
And in most cases, it has not been validated.
Right. For whatever reasons, your brain at that moment in time said, this is not the time to validate. This is the time to respond.
Yep.
And whatever. So that tells me a survival instinct is being triggered somehow or another. Yeah. So, all right. Okay. In the time we have remaining, I just wanted to take you to a little bit of a conclusion about this subject we've been working on about essential universal human values. And I had a very lengthy discussion with ChatGPT about it. And by lengthy, I mean at least 2 hours of conversation with ChatGPT about this. I don't even know what to refer to that as. It needs a name. It needs to be Siri or somebody, Anyway, and one of the things that it ultimately came out, because I kept challenging, I'd say, we've been discussing these are not values that are universally shared. This is not universal. What is universal? And it came back and said, in order for something to be universal, it would have to be something that is programmed into us genetically. It would have to be something that's part of our DNA. It would then, I said, so, and if it was, how would it manifest itself? And ChatGPT said it would manifest itself as an instinctual behavior. That is, no one needed to teach you, no one needed to know. It was that. So I said, all right, let's stop talking about values then, which tend to come later in life based on conditioning, culture, everything you can plug in there, and instead say, well, what are these human instincts? Now, the only instinct that I was ever taught when I was in school, and I was mostly studying life sciences, biology, things like that. But one of the things that it said was that fear is the instinct that keeps us alive. That's the thing I really remember, that fear is an instinct that we have. And that it is why a child's grip as an infant is actually stronger per pound or ounce of body weight than it is later in life. And one of the experiments that they did to kind of illustrate this was that they would have an absolutely brand new infant laying in its little crib, bassinet thing, whatever, and right above it, they would suspend a little bit of a rope kind of a thing. And again, it's barely an inch or so above the baby. They would place the baby's hands on the rope and then lift the baby's body off of the surface of the bassinet. And that baby would immediately grab hold of that rope. And getting it to let go was no real easy feat. And so I'm sure there was more to the research than that, but that was the gist of it, that even a newborn infant may not understand what down is, but they know that down could be bad. And so they're going to hang on to whatever it is that they've got. So there's that. So that was the only instinct I thought humans had. And so I said, all right, then tell me what human instincts are really innate. Sorts of things. So this is what it says. Human instincts are innate, automatic, behavioral, and psychological patterns that are present in all individuals of a species. While humans have evolved complex cognitive abilities that can override or modify some instincts, there are still certain instinctual behaviors and inclinations that can be observed. Here are a few examples of human instincts. And that first one is survival instinct. So humans have a natural inclination to preserve their own lives and ensure their well-being. This instinct drives behaviors such as seeking shelter, avoiding danger, and pursuing basic needs like food and water. And so I think, well, then we could deduce that surviving is a value that all humans share. And about that, would anyone have any argument around where you go like, yeah, that's an instinct. We value surviving. Yeah. And then,
Definitely.
then they went on maternal instinct. Many individuals, particularly women, so I think what they're just saying here is that this instinct may very well be stronger in females of a species than in males of the species, but they have a natural inclination to care for and protect. The moment you put protect up there, I do believe that you've just included the males of the species as well. So providing and protecting seems to be at least a very common instinctual feeling that males of our species have. You guys can disagree with me, but if I said to you, if you ever question a man's ability to provide and to protect those that are around him, that he's responsible for or care for, you are really attacking a guy at a guy's essence. So somehow or another, you guys can tell me if you're different, but I never went out trying to develop a concern for other people's safety, but there's something that is instinctually triggered in me anytime I see that someone else is in any kind of danger. So I get it. It might be more prevalent among mothers or among females, but I do believe that the men are coming into play here as well. So this instinct can manifest itself as nurturing behaviors, a strong bond with one's children, and a drive to ensure their safety and well-being. So if we said that caring for our offspring, and generalize it to the offspring of others as well, I would say that's kind of an instinctual thing we have as well. And that I think we would be able to say, then we value these kinds of behaviors, or doing these kinds of behaviors is a shared value. Are we in agreement with this so far? Is this kind of making a little more sense than just looking at what cultures seem to value?
Yeah, this
It
is, I
is.
think, a better conversation, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
Hey T,
Um,
when you think about number one, I think about like adrenaline junkies or people, those daredevils. So is that just like, do we consider them as outliers because they're necessary? They're doing something, going into a particular activity that
yeah.
actually knowing that this could end.
Yeah, I think it's covered by this little sentence up here that while we have evolved complex
Right,
cognitive
gotcha.
abilities that can override or modify some instincts. I would say that if it's an instinct prevents us from doing something stupid, unless we have decided to do something stupid. I've never understood jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. I've never understood jumping off of a cliff into a river. I mean, I don't understand these things. Is that my instinct just coming along and saying like, no, and the adrenaline isn't really worth it? But you're absolutely right. I know plenty of adrenaline junkies. I would say to you though that an adrenaline junkie engaging in whatever the behavior happens to be does hold the belief that they will survive. So they know that there's a danger involved, but they genuinely believe they'll be okay. Or like the threat is worth taking, the risk is worth taking, or whatever might come along there. Do you guys agree with that as far as adrenaline junkies go?
Yes.
Yeah. Some are another. They think it's okay. This third one I thought was really just a variation on the first one. So the fight or flight response, when faced with a perceived threat, humans experience the instinctual fight or flight. Now we know we'd add two more to that. This innate reaction prepares the body to either confront the threat or flee from it, activating physiological changes like increased heart rate, heightened senses, and the release of stress hormones. All that's certainly true, but I think that still doesn't number three follow number one?
I
So,
think,
Too.
yeah,
yeah,
I
I
think they're
mean,
cousins.
this doesn't feel independent from number one. I don't think I would be fighting or flighting if I didn't have my survival instinct already alerted.
But
Well,
T,
I think the term response gives you that clue too.
Yeah,
That's a behavior, right?
yeah, that's the behavioral part, right?
yeah, Kathy, because when I read that, I thought about police situations and where the suspect takes off running, and people say, "Well, why did he run?" It could be in part because of this.
Oh, it's an instinct.
Yes.
That's why I've never understood. There are some police stories that I know aggravate us all. And I understand that all these stories, we at least hope and statistically should understand that it represents a rather tiny percentage of the complete body of law enforcement officers that are out there. I really do like to think that most of them, most of the time, do most of the things that we would hope that they would do given a set of circumstances. Nevertheless, I've never understood this idea about resisting arrest. This is an instinct that's being triggered. And you want to hold me legally responsible for my instinctual response to the you I perceive as a threat. So I've never understood that, never ever understood that. So yeah, you better believe, particularly, I'll give you one example. I forget the name of I think he was a tennis player. He was staying at a hotel in New York City and standing there waiting for his car to show up so he could go wherever he was trying to go. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets tackled by an officer who is not in uniform. I don't think they were off duty, but they were not in uniform, and they did not identify themselves as a police officer until after the fact. They're going like, this is police, blah blah blah, and they what do we say? Accused him, arrested him for resisting arrest. I don't even know that you're a police officer. You're just some brute that's come barreling at me out of the blue. My instincts have been triggered. And you don't get to hold me legally responsible for something that is an instinctual sort of thing, particularly when you failed to identify yourself in any sort of way. So am I to assume everyone who attacks me is a police officer? Am I to assume that everyone who even is out of uniform but identifies themselves as a police officer is legit? So you get the idea why that creates kind of a problem right there. I'm just sharing my own.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And why do young black males run? Well, that's a pretty, normal response because
Yeah, I can't fight so I got to flee. So
Yeah, I was watching this program the other night, and these two FBI agents were after this particular guy, and they had this food delivery guy deliver the food to the guy that they were after. Well, the guy was sitting on a stoop with a bunch of other guys, and so when they saw the delivery person give the guy the food, one of the FBI agents began moving in that direction. And as soon as the guy sitting on the stoop saw her approaching, and she had a vest on that had FBI in the front of it, they all, including the guy she was there coming to see, they all just took off running. So it is definitely this fight or flight response.
Absolutely.
As Kathy said, it was the behavior, was the action, and the response was, I'm out of here. And they took off running.
Survival instinct was triggered, which led to a fight or flight response. There you go. There you go. So I've never understood why we hold people legally responsible for fighting back. I'm sorry, but I don't like what you're doing to me. So there, obviously you got to be careful. If they're in uniform, I might be saying something very different, but I still would challenge their behavior. Nevertheless, you're not in uniform. You've not identified yourself, and I'm supposed to let you get away with tackling me? No. Okay, number 4, the sexual instinct. So humans have a natural instinctual drive for reproduction. That instinct can manifest as sexual attraction, the desire for intimacy and companionship, and the pursuit of forming romantic and sexual relationships. I don't disagree with that. I do believe that procreation or the perpetuation of the species is an instinct that we all have. And so this is how it all comes to happen. But I think if we try to apply this to other species, I don't know how many species require romance. I don't know that, that might be something that's being driven by the sexual instinct, but I think it's being driven for another reason, which I think is a little bit further down grid. It's about that desire to seek companionship, bond with whatever. When I think of the sexual instinct, I think really more about the whole mating sort of ritual, practice, whatever, as opposed to trying to form a family or, whatever the case may be. You get that? So for whatever reason, I see number 4 as being related to number 6, but also distinct from number 6, if we just modify a little bit of Chat's definition there. So now that would mean, though, if we want to say that our little patterners were saying that instincts may very well be inherent values, we could say we value procreation of the species. I don't know that it's so much that we value this actual physical behavior as much as we just accept the fact that physical behavior is necessary, and biology has made it pleasant enough that we'll do it. But I think that's different. The need, but the instinct to procreate, it seems to me to be different than the instinct to socialize. When they happen at the same time, great. Maybe that's what we're saying is a truly intimate, relationship. Thoughts about that, or?
Yeah, no, wait, you had said earlier about, the value comes later, it's the instinct would come first and then the value would come later. I think in terms of this social piece, I mean, listen, we've been learning this forever as an anthropologist. I mean, this is what we've seen over and over again, that humans do want to form community in some
Yep.
fashion.
Yep.
Whether it's because of self-preservation, we don't know. Whether that was what the original reason was, we don't know. I'm really wondering where love comes in.
Mm. Hmm. That would be very interesting to see. Is love a learned behavior? Is love an emotion we're actually born with? See, when I think about number two, this maternal instinct thing, I can certainly see that one of the driving forces underneath there would be that love. When I think about nurturing behaviors, that sort of thing, and maybe we then spread that belief that love exists outside of that kind of a relationship,
18.
Yes.
I remember a speaker once shared about, if you did something to my spouse, what you're looking at, you would perceive as my anger. He said, but what it actually is, it's my love. Right, because that's what, like you were sharing about that protection, right? It's that love for them. For you, it might be anger. For me, this motive is love. So I could see a connection to a maternal instinct for a protector.
Yeah, because when do we actually experience our very first love? I mean, it's got to be through the connection with our parent. So obviously first with mom, and then hopefully very soon afterwards with dad. But we have to know that we are loved. Remember in pride-based leadership, I say, oh, and then Edie, I'll ask you to chime in. In pride-based leadership, we say that the children are always looking for three messages. They need to hear that they are loved, they are safe, and they are valued. And as long as those three messages are being sent and received, then you're going to have a pretty good kid on your hand. And the reason why we have problems with kids and we end up having problems with adults is because as during their formative years, they may not have heard those three messages as often enough, as sincerely enough, that they came to believe that they were true. So Edie, what would you like to share?
I just went, who mentioned that it was really like protection of their wife?
I think that was that Chris or Tim? I think it was Chris.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's always the case, because I think sometimes it's their own protection, it's their jealousy, losing control. And so I can't say that that sounds onerous to say that I'm protecting my wife. I think they're often protecting themselves.
Their own best interests. And which gets to Kathy's point about this idea about social instinct. Maybe the reason why humans started forming these kinds of social relationships was, as she was saying, so we could kind of like share some responsibilities, we can work together more cooperatively. And as a result, we can have better food, have better protection, have better whatever the needs happen to be. And so maybe part of this social instinct involves us evaluating whether or not another individual brings us sufficient value that we acknowledge that and want that around us. So I hate to say this way, but maybe when we believe that a person no longer offers us any real utility, then we kind of toss them aside. So is it really love, or is it just an appreciation and an acknowledgement that you are useful, you have utility in my life, where my offspring may very well be receiving genuine love? Isn't that terrible? Turn that into a Hallmark card.
What?
Yeah, I
And
think. No,
you
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, is it also somewhat learned or cultural? Because in the South, I've noticed a totally different behavior. Example, if I talk too much to a woman's husband here, they kind of just pull him aside. I see this all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Come
And
to
in Wisconsin,
daily.
everybody dances with everybody's husband and what. It's just one big happy family. There's a total difference of this is my man. And I did not see that in the 50 years I was in Wisconsin.
But going back to Kathy's point, is that then because the gal loves the guy, or because she sees that the guy has value to her and doesn't want to lose that control that he might represent or bring to the thing? I know everyone's saying love, 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 but is it really about love, or is it about utility? Isn't that terrible? But, yeah. Oh, but I think you're right. I think that ultimately love is something that gets adorned by cultural experiences, expectations, things we are watching and learning. I mean, what were some of the back in the day? This tells you how old I am. My sister seemed to have a lot of, I didn't know what to call them, teen heartthrob kinds of magazines. What do they call those things? They were never marketed towards guys, but it was like all of the teen idols and that. And so she would have posters up on her wall of this guy or that guy or whatever. And I always went, where did that come from? That in fact, I know I'm babbling, but one of the things that I was sharing with somebody just a day or two ago is that while men may be guilty of turning women into sex objects, women are equally guilty of turning men into romance objects. And so I thought, well, maybe that's what something that's applying here. They're being culturally exposed to this whole idea about romance. And why romance is such an important thing. And, guys, certainly not so much. Thoughts about that, or is that just my weird world?
No, it's interesting because I never did any of those, romance things. I couldn't stand them.
Yeah, there you go.
And I still can't. And the thing of it is, I think it all depends upon your own upbringing or whatever, even though my mother said she read all those things herself, which I found totally unbelievable. But I think it just depends upon the individual.
Yeah.
I had a friend from high school whose mother constantly told her that if she wasn't dating somebody and going with somebody by the time she graduated from high school, she would really not be successful or whatever.
Right.
And she married right away. It was interesting because she divorced, I don't know how much time later.
Yep.
But I just thought it was interesting that her mother in 68 said that.
Well, in 68, I was not old enough yet to be thinking about relationships and all that sort of stuff. But I have watched plenty of movies, TV shows that are situated in that time period, but then go back even further and further and further. And for how long have women basically been told that the only way you're going to be able to survive is if you marry well? And so, I go, we like watching the big dress dramas, all the Victorian sorts of stuff and Regency period, Edwardian sorts of things. It's always the message. It must have sucked to be a woman back in those time periods, even as bad as it may still be in many regards today. How many of you would have wanted to grow up in that kind of a culture, in that kind of time period? So,
Well, the 60s, I mean, having lived there, having been a teenager at that time, that was a very transitional time period. I mean, my parents weren't that way, thank God, but plenty of parents were, and plenty of my peers were.
yeah, of course.
And that continued on through the 70s. So and misogyny was absolutely blatant at that time.
Celebrate.
So-
Yeah, Tim's saying like leave it to Beaver. Yeah.
Yeah,
Watch.
So it's not that far away from us, and I think we're reversing back to it. Is what I think is. I mean, in some, not in all ways, but in some ways.
Well,
Yeah.
and some are very much advocating for that, that we lived much better lives when women stayed at home and raised the families and men went out and made the money. I'm like, ugh. Oh, yeah, the pendulum is always swinging. All right, just to finish this off so we can move on to a new topic next time around. We've talked a bit about sexual instinct. I get that. We've talked about social instinct. We all get that there is value in aligning ourselves with others. But this last one is just curiosity instinct, that humans exhibit a natural inclination to explore and seek new experiences. And I completely agree with that, that as we've talked about before, a child, pops out as like a computer fresh out of the box, if you will. They have a basic operating system, but no programming and no data. And so we kind of like are built to go out there and start to collect data and see patterns and all that kind of around us. So I don't know, the curiosity is what it's really all about, but that does make sense. So I can see how that is also something which translated to a value statement would say that we value learning, we value curiosity, we value understanding. And I would say that might hold true across all humans from all cultures throughout all of history, or they wouldn't have survived. I think that they weren't curious to know about animals with teeth and what animals with teeth do, and so they learned that the hard way. But you get the idea. So those are the 6 that ChatGPT came up with, and so the only other thing I was going to do is just say, where might these instincts live on the change grid? So maybe next time around we will talk a little bit about that. For those of you who might be going to YouTube to see some of our videos or revisit some of these subjects, I don't know how I'm going to label this call. Part of it was intended to be this Universal Values Part 3, but because we spent a good chunk of time talking about DEI, I might go ahead and give a hybrid title to it. So it might just be DEI/Universal Values and see where that goes with that. But I think we've kind of talked enough about values for a while. So let's see what we can move on to next time around. If anyone has anything like to suggest, that would be great. Yeah, good.
That's right.
Thank you.
All righty, take care, everyone. We'll talk again soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.